Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkins, your host, and today I have with me Mr. Todd Creneti. Now, I am very excited about this conversation because we chatted just a few minutes before we jumped on and started recording, and we have a lot in common, but I'm sure there's still a lot I can learn from him in the field of mindset and just personal growth, which if you've listened for any amount of time, you know I'm very passionate about that. Todd, man, thank you so much first of all, for being here, and then share with us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation as well. So the short story is I spent the first 32 years of my professional life in education. I was a college football coach at one point. That's how I began. High school coach for most of my 30-year coaching career. I had the opportunity to coach a couple of different sports, but really football was where I loved to be and where I thrived. And through that process of being an educator and being a leader and running a program, I had the opportunity to start doing some speaking engagements here and there, things local, some things further away. And I started to notice that as I was working through some of my own life challenges and difficulties, that I wanted to understand more about my own brain. And as a result, I sort of wanted to do deep dives into brain science and into psychology and mindset, as you referenced. And I would go in to do these talks to different organizations with great, really, I thought, smart topics. And I get to the Q&A, and all anybody ever wanted to ask me about was football. And at first it annoyed me, and then it fascinated me, because I realized that people saw before I did this connection between the world of athletics and the world of business, or the world of athletics and the world of any organization. And what I really started to learn is if you go back and you look at Fortune 500 business leaders, it's more likely that they played a high school sport than were in the National Honor Society. So there are all these people out there who have an athletic background who therefore respond to this athletic language. And it allowed me then, once I recognized that we all sort of landed on performance language together, this language that revolves around how do I get better today? How do I get my team better today? I could just see that sliding from the athletic world into the business world, into nonprofits, whatever it was. And so now I have my own business. I run a small consulting company, small one. And I work with businesses, in the Midwest and in the Northeast, some here in Florida, where I'm based. And I have the opportunity to work with teams to really figure out what it takes for them to function at their very best, for them to excel. And a lot of times that's communication, that's breaking down old barriers, that's creating engagement in those organizations. But that's really my story as to how I got here today.
I often say that there's a huge correlation with, I call it fitness. It's not sports, but it's similar. And as we spoke a little bit prior to this about, it both requires discipline. But I come from the fitness industry. I competed years ago, and I can say that on my journey through life and through business specifically has been that has been hugely foundational for
Absolutely.
my mindset. So I think there's a huge correlation. I don't know much about football, I'll be honest with you, but
Okay.
I do think that any team sport, that's one thing that in the fitness bodybuilding realm, it's really missing, is it's more of an individual sport. You're not going out and competing as a team. Sure. So I would love I know we're going to dive into all of these things, but
Right.
This correlation, like, when did you first start seeing this? When you started speaking?
No, actually, and I had this really clear memory from, I want to say I was in middle school, or maybe I was a freshman in high school. My father was also a coach for over 50 years. and the head coach for the vast majority of that. So it wasn't uncommon for us in the summer to be going to the weddings of his former players or visiting somebody. And we were moving my sister into college in Massachusetts, and he had a former player who had been a football player at Notre Dame, who was now getting his MBA at Harvard. And obviously, a guy who struggled right mightily through life, seemed to figure it out. But he was talking to my dad about this work he was doing at IBM, and he said, "Coach, it's the craziest thing." He said, "We don't have work groups anymore. We're not in, we're not in whatever they used to call them." He said they reorganized us into teams, and that was the first time I remember hearing that the business world was adopting the language of sports. And since then, you've seen a lot of that. Everybody works in teams right now. Organizations often make coaching available to their team members. They bring people like me in to do coaching with groups or individuals. And then you have, performance goals that we talk about from a win-loss perspective. We need this many wins this year to really feel good about what we're doing as an organization. And these are the places we feel like we can get our wins, and these are the places we're going to take our losses. And so it's really been since that moment that I've sort of tracked the language and how it started to weave its way into the business world. And now it's there so much we don't even think about it. So it's been sort of a fascination of mine for a long time. But when I started to speak, what happened there was that was when the penny dropped that, okay, here's how I connect these two things in a way that doesn't make me sound like I'm just telling football stories, which have really no value in a business setting. Instead, we're going to talk about the things it takes to be a high level competitive athlete and, more importantly, a great teammate. And that's going to speak to how organizations can be better, grow stronger, and more cohesive.
Mhm. I have to disagree here because I think that, you said that, or you mentioned that, and quote me if I misunderstood this, but football is like it basically meaningless in the business world. But we're seeing this on a very regular scale. Like I sat in a business conference recently, and I heard Jocko Willink talk. Now he's not
Oh, yeah.
an athlete, but he come from the military. Same type of mindset, as with sports. And I think that there's a lot of value. And I'm curious, with you being a consultant, do you see a difference in, say, someone that has come out of a team type environment, maybe the military, maybe a sports team, versus someone who's never been exposed to that, and you're trying to coach both of these people in the business world? Do you see a difference with that?
I do. And I'm going to go back and really quickly address your question because it was a good one, or your point. It's not that the athletic experience isn't relevant. It's that oftentimes coaches will prattle on about, this game on this day and this place against this team. And if we're just telling a story about a game, it doesn't really connect. It's finding ways to talk about these pieces in ways that are relevant for other people. And one of the things I learned early on was hearing from organizations that were hiring how much they loved to hire athletes, college athletes, or kids with an athletic mindset. And I wanted to know why. And they said, come on, they're great teammates. They understand the value of team. They don't expect to come in and be at the top of the org chart right away. They know they have to earn it. They're generally hard workers, that they were successful as athletes in college. And those are sort of the foundational pieces that people are looking for when they're trying to develop their workforce. I did some work with a group called the Positive Coaching Alliance, the Tampa branch I was very involved in for 4 years, worked with some fantastic people. And we had people who were donating to us because they believe so much in the workforce development component of athletics. And they wanted to help us present and share content with high school athletes, understanding that they would have kids who are more prepared to enter the workforce if they were athletes than if they had not been athletes. So I definitely do. And I think the military is similar in a lot of ways as well, because it requires the structure, the commitment, the recognition of the greater good. And I think all those things make for really, really strong teammates. At the root of both of those things is, if you want to be a successful athlete in a team sport, if you want to be a great part of the military, you have to be selfless. You have to understand that it's not a win unless we all win, and that our personal gain means very little if we don't win in the big picture.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, this is a place where I really lack, because I remember even growing up, I would say like, "Oh, when I got into fitness," and I was young. I was like 17, 18 years old when I first started lifting weights. And I was like, "Oh, it's an individual sport. I don't have to depend on anybody else to pull their
Right.
weight. I pull my own
Right.
weight." But now, being in my 40s, I look back and I'm like, I really missed out on some valuable lessons and learning how to work cohesively with a team. And I see this even really kind of manifesting in my life and in my business now, because there's things where I'm like, I don't want to delegate. I just want to do it
Right.
myself. Mindset is your thing. And I know that the things that we've discussed is huge on mindset. Even going into business, I said this on another podcast yesterday, that I find business much more difficult than
Mhm.
lifting weights or competing in fitness
Sure.
or getting to the gym every day. Like business, there's so many things, components to it. There's so
Yes.
many
Yeah.
moving pieces. Talk to us a little bit about like that mindset. How do you get someone, first of all, on board to say like, this is a mindset thing, and then how do you begin to transition them to adopt these winning mindsets?
So let me press in the example that you just gave. And who knows, maybe it relates to the connection you have to trauma, right? Which brings us all here to talk about this. But at some point, you decided you wanted to lift weights, and you were in complete control of everything in that arena. You were in control of when you went to the gym, how long you lifted, what body parts you lifted, how you ate, how much sleep you got. You had complete control over that environment. And for a lot of people, being in an environment where we have as much control as is humanly possible is the most comfortable place to be. Human beings are wired for comfort. Homeostasis is where our body would like us to be, which is why in books like Peak, you learn about the idea that we really have to have these sort of small stretches over time if we really want to grow. We can't go too far outside of our comfort zone, because when we do, we fail. And so we want to have these small targets just outside of our comfort zone that we can grow towards. So for you, taking control of that environment and your training meant that you were taking control of your success directly. It wasn't going to be affected by anybody else. Maybe someday you went in there and somebody was, hogging a machine or taking all the dumbbells that you needed. And so you had to get creative. But for the most part, you were in complete control of your environment. As soon as you step into the business world, we look for clients, we look to collaborate, we look to connect and to network. And now there are other people who are involved who affect our ability to be successful.
Mhm.
And we don't know if we can trust them. We don't know what their motives are. We don't know if they have the same work ethic that we do, if they don't share the values that we share. It can be really, really challenging. And I think that the question is, if I'm right, how do you take somebody from that mindset into this team mindset? If you use the business side of it, it's the idea of scalability, right? Somebody told me years ago that he wanted me to do work with him and he wanted to grow this business. And I told him what I really wanted to do. He's like, yeah, but you can never scale yourself. You're always going to have the hours and the energy of one person.
Mhm.
When you invite somebody into a team, you're really inviting them into a relationship and into a culture. And if that culture is one where we support one another, we make sure everybody has what they need to be great and to excel, all of a sudden I find myself with an abundance of resources, an abundance of support, and the opportunity to do things I can't do as a party of one, if you will. So to me, the mindset shift is I know that I want to do more. In order to be able to do that, I need to find a group of people I trust and who I'm ready to go to work with and dig in with. But that also means giving up some control day to day, and I have to see the value in giving up that control so that I can grow. Feels counterintuitive, especially if you're somebody who has driven your own success for your entire life. But giving up just enough control that I grow, that I get better, that I benefit from the perspectives and the ideas and the thoughts of other people is the invitation for me, for somebody who's lived in a more solo environment, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. I really that resonates with me and it makes sense. And it's funny, I've never really thought of it quite like that. But yeah, I think it totally makes sense. I want you to talk a little bit about like we've kind of done an overview here of like what it is you do, but what really moved you in like obviously there's practical things that has moved you into doing what you're doing, but the purpose, the heart behind it. Was there something that you experienced or multiple things that you experienced that made you really want to instill this mindset and this transformational outlook and perspective on other people?
That the question feels like it's like a 4-part podcast, right? There's so many things that I feel like I could comment on there. Let me start with a conversation that happened in the recent past in the room I'm in right now. This is my coach's office. You see a couple of pictures of kids behind me. They're on all 4 walls. There are pictures of the kids that I've coached. There are helmets. There's different things that just remind me of the time that I spent on the field. My wife and I were decorating this office near the end of the COVID shutdown. And I had some plaques in my closet that were Coach of the Year type things, awards that I'd won or whatever. And they're in a box in my closet. And she pulled them out. She's like, "Hey, where do you want to put these?" I was like, "Right back in the closet." And I sort of got short because I was uncomfortable having the conversation. And I came back a couple days later and I said to her, I was like, "Hey, I want to clarify where that came from, that discomfort." And it was the idea that I've realized in my life that what gets me out of bed in the morning is the opportunity to help other people be successful. And you may say, well, as a coach, of course, that makes perfect sense. But I've never much been interested in my own success as much as I am helping other people find theirs. And that trails all the way back to my own trauma story, which is I have dealt with, pretty significant mental health issues throughout my life. I think that I can remember a time being just 4 or 5 years old where I was feeling a set of emotions. And when my parents came to ask me about it, instantly I lied because I didn't want them to know what I was really feeling. Because I was a boy, and boys who were tough, those were the boys that everybody liked. They could be leaders and they could do all these great things. And so I lived in this place for most of my life where I pretended to be something that I wasn't. And I wrestled with these things and the adversity that was creeping up on me as I really was responsible for trauma that was largely self-inflicted, not entirely, but largely. As I worked through that and tried to keep it hidden or tucked away or shut behind a door somewhere, it only got worse and it only began to consume me more. And I've shared with a handful of people that for significant chunks of my life in college, my professional life until probably 10 years ago, the hardest thing that I did most days was get out of bed because there just wasn't the drive to do it. The anxiety and the dread was so significant that this is the day I'd be found out, that this is the day that it would all go sideways and unravel. And as I began to coach, and as much as I love the X's and O's of my sport, I found myself, more in love with the young people that were walking through my door. And I wanted them to be able to live lives free of the things that had really held me back. And so I feel like I doubled down on the desire to help them not just be great players, but be great people. And in order to be great people, it means we need to be willing to face the adversity that's in our lives. And not only face it, but embrace it. And that's sort of it's one of my taglines that I love, is that if we embrace adversity, we can achieve excellence. But until we're willing to look at the adversity that's in our lives and wrestle it until we get the lesson that it has for us, we're going to exert too much energy running from it, hiding from it, pretending it's not there. And so it brings me back to this place where, so when I say to you, I would love to be the kind of person in your life who helps you excel and accomplish your goals. It's not just about the performance and the training. It's about doing the work that we often don't want to talk about because we don't have words for it, or we don't want to talk about it because, unfortunately, in our country and our society, if I have cancer, I'm sick. If I struggle with mental illness, I'm crazy. And we're afraid of these labels that live out there. And while those aren't accurate labels, they are labels that are floating out there on a regular basis. And so my drive to help other people become, I say it this way, the best version of themselves is really about overcoming these hurdles that live in the dark that we don't know how to talk about. Because as I was growing up, you didn't do those things. And I'm sure that my parents wished I had, or my coaches wished I had, as they saw me really struggle at different periods in my life. But those weren't the messages I was getting from the world. And so my hope is by talking about my own struggles, my own adversity, my own trauma, that I can invite other people into the conversation and we can demystify these things that are so scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said a lot of things there. A lot of things I totally agree with. Like we're in alignment on a lot of those things for sure. Um, I think we do have to talk about our story. Obviously, there's a time and a place, and certain times to divulge more things, and certain people or groups to divulge
Absolutely.
those things around. But at whatever capacity you feel led to share, it's important to share. And I love what you said going back earlier when you said, you're put yourself just right outside the comfort zone. Because
Mhm.
if I had a really uncomfortable story, and I lived with guilt and shame for years. I had a
Mhm.
really uncomfortable story, and it was like I couldn't share that story in its fullness at that
Right.
time. But as I begin to share little pieces here and there, like
Right.
getting a little bit more uncomfortable or sharing it with a little bit more people that I felt safe in that environment. Now, it's been 20 something years and like I can share without shame. I mean, it didn't come without
Right.
work, but
Right.
but I think it's so important to share stories for that reason for other people because we do offer a hope to others. But also just a release, like getting it out of ourself because and you alluded to this as well, but I think it's so dangerous to take that trauma, whatever trauma that is, to ignore it and then just we pack it away. We just keep
Right.
packing it away.
Right.
And I truly believe that this is why we see a lot of mental health. This is why we see a lot of people,
Agreed.
in depression or hooked on drugs or, you know,
Self-medicating.
using self-medicating, whether that be, spending too much money or going,
Right.
um, you know, having promiscuous sex or whatever. It's like there's all these things that people band-aid. And it's like, if you don't get that infection out, it's going to continue to manifest and you're going to continue to spin your wheels, like you said, energy. You're spending all this time, effort, energy on trying to heal this thing, but you're not healing it. You're putting a band aid over it and it's just
Yeah.
dwelling more infection inside of you.
And it's
So,
coming out one way or the other, right?
yeah.
It's going to come out, and it can either come out in a way where we've done the work to be a part of the healing, and we're going to bring it out in a way that's helpful, or it's going to come out in a way that people are standing around with their jaws wide open, going, "I had no idea this was going on." Then they don't even know how to help at that stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like triggering. I think this is where triggers come from because I have had to ask myself, even in certain circumstances and situations where things will happen and I respond. I don't think through it. There's no rhyme or reason why I responded. And then later I go back and I'm like, why did I respond that way?
Yeah.
Something triggered me from my past. It was a past trauma that I have not dealt with. It needed to be peeled back and revealed. And then there you have the choice. Do I deal with it? Do I feel it and then release it or go get healed from it or find healing practices for it? Or do I stuff it?
Right. Depending on how you choose to sort of explain or frame emotional intelligence. For me, it starts with the two foundational pieces of self-awareness and self-management. And those are the things that you're talking about, at least to an extent. Self-awareness is, do I understand what I'm feeling? And we don't always, or we convince ourselves that we're not. We tell ourselves these stories that are not helpful, that help us just sort of deflect or remove ourselves from the things that we're feeling. And then once we are aware of what we're feeling, can we then, with that real emotion and that honest awareness, manage those emotions in a way that's productive? And so before you even move into the other facing pieces of emotional intelligence, that need to be aware and that need to be able to manage is a place where I think a lot of us get stuck, and we have these old habits. We do these things that soothe but don't fix.
Mhm.
And that's really an unhelpful cycle.
Mhm. And there is a stigma around this too. Like there's an
Yeah.
embarrassment. Like you
Yeah.
said this earlier too about the mental health. It's like, why in our culture, I don't that's part of the reason I do the podcast, is I want people to know, like, hey, it's okay to talk about the hard things. We've all been through something that
Hmm.
we could say we're embarrassed about or, you
Right.
know, shameful about, but it's like the stigma of, it's like, if I struggle with mental health, like you said, people think you're crazy. And there's the
Yeah.
stigma around it to where now if you are struggling, people struggle in silence because they don't want to say anything.
Right.
I do think in this rise of social media, there is this fine line that people walk where now they're able to share like their traumas. Traumas is kind of a trigger word. They're
Hmm.
able to share their their shame and their heartache and these things.
Right.
And that's good. But then you also run the risk of going into the victim mentality. And I'm
Yes.
sure
Yes.
yeah, and with your background, your experience, I'm sure you've had some experience with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, again, it's such a great and insightful question. It's so comfortable to be the victim, right? Because when we're the victim, everybody else wants to take care of us and everybody else wants to help us get better. And yet, the work that we have to do often is work that we need to be accountable for on our own. So, one of the ways that I talk about this is I have this little concept, and we all have catchphrases or buzzwords. But I started fooling with this phrase "broken up" about 5 years ago. And when we talk about things that are broken up, where relationships are broken up, bands are broken up, those things make us sad. We hear when things are broken up that, wow, that's unfortunate. And so I sort of wanted to spin that as I was learning how to sort of embrace my own adversity, face my own challenges, and be willing to be somebody who was so looking forward to this podcast so I could talk about the things that I struggle with, right? That is not what we want to share with the whole world. But I think it's so important that people step out and tell their story. And then if enough people do it, we all find somebody who looks like us that we can relate to, who's had this experience. But for me, broken up prevents us from going into the victim mode. And this is how that we all have brokenness. We all experience brokenness in our lives. But the idea for me to say out loud, hey, I'm broken, scary, right? Um, I'm not sure everybody else would understand. And when we talk about emotional brokenness or brokenness related to trauma, there's never the assurance that it can be fixed. And we often wonder, hey, if I'm broken, am I fixable? And so instead of taking brokenness in that direction, it's the idea that, again, if we face the brokenness that we feel, if we're willing to address it, stare it in the eyes, wrestle with it, do the work, that brokenness eventually elevates us. And that break moves us up. It makes us stronger. It's not a break that doesn't heal. Hey, every doctor in the world will tell you if you break your tibia or you break your wrist or whatever, when those bones are set in the right way and they're given time to heal, that area is stronger, not weaker. And so when we are willing to face our brokenness and really work through it, and I think that that becomes almost a superpower. I'll give you an example that's not trauma related, but I struggled to read for most of my life in school, but I was smart enough and verbal enough as a kid that in kindergarten, first grade, I got to be in all the high reading groups. But I spent a lot of time listening to other people talking about what they were reading. And I knew in high school that I couldn't get through a book. And it wasn't just attention, it was something different. And it wasn't until I was in college that I was taking a Latin class and a professor said to me, "You're either cheating or your brain works differently." And I went and did some testing that I found out that I was dyslexic. As I shared with you before we sort of started to record, when I'm doing speaking engagements, the thing that people are most likely to point out is, "I don't know how you do that without notes." And it's not that I choose to do it without notes. It's the idea of reading something in front of a crowd is terrifying to me because I'm afraid I'm going to reverse a word. And for me, words move from one line to the other and they land out of context and they make no sense. Is one of the things that happens. And so I'm a better speaker in public because I wrestled with dyslexia. And what fascinates me about that is it could have just shut me down. It could have made me say, "Hey, I can't do the work. I can't really be in school with these other people. Everybody else is so smart." But I was so determined to be seen as somebody who was an intelligent person that I found ways to cope. Now, because it doesn't dip into mental health in the same way, that's an easy path to take. But if I'm telling people on a daily basis, I never thought I was going to get out of bed this morning, right? That sets off a whole other set of worries. If I say to somebody, "I'm having thoughts that are scary," that sets off a whole different set of worries. And so we have to figure out ways to discuss our brokenness, to share that is healthy, but staying away from that victim side of it. Instead, saying, "Okay, I'm going to be the hero in my own story. I'm going to take this thing head on, and I'm going to find out what the lesson it is that it has for me, and I'm going to let it make me better instead of keeping me under its thumb."
Mm. And there's where the power is, I believe. Like, I truly believe that that's why, even the name of my podcast, Through the Trauma, From Trauma to Triumph. It's like, that's the beauty of it. When you can take that brokenness and you can turn it into something powerful. And I've
Yes.
actually done a lot of thought on this. I've given this a lot of thought. In fact, I just recently went through something that I felt like was emotionally breaking me, and then spiritually, I feel like I was being spiritually broken.
Yeah.
And first you get angry, and then you get sad, and then you get like all of these emotions. And then at the end of the day, it's like God so patiently reminded me, like, why do you go to the gym, Amber? Do you go to the gym to break your muscles apart? Like, is that how they grow? Like, you have to be broken so you can grow. And I also think that a perspective shift needs to be done by most people. And I'm sure I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. But this idea of having something wrong with you, sometimes that is a unique gift.
Yes.
And those things, like, the world may deem that as bad. Like, that's bad. You're different. We need to medicate you. We need to do these, like with your
Right.
dyslexia. But
Right.
I truly believe that's like a superpower. And
It
the
can be for
world
sure.
it's scared of things like that. And I think that a
Yeah.
lot of times people they they think that the thing that they've been assigned to be this person, or they get a label of like what they are, and then it's like, something's wrong with me, and the world would have them believe that. But when you stand back, you just have to shift your perspective in the sense of, maybe this is the thorn in my side that is put here to make me grow, or maybe it is truly a blessing that I just have to learn how to tailor and use. It's a tool.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. Let's go back into the gym for a minute, because even though I wasn't a fitness athlete necessarily or a bodybuilder, for all the years that I played football, I had to be in the weight room, had to be working and getting stronger. And you were even saying before that we get these things inside of us and we got to get rid of them. We got to move them out. So people who love the lift talk about the burn, right? They love the burn. What's the burn? The burn's the release of lactic acid that gets released as our muscle breaks down. Some people go to the gym and the burn reminds them of two things. That was a great workout, and I need to go roll out and make sure that I recover. And that's a very progressive way of thinking about addressing that. Some people go to the gym for the first time in 10 years. They wake up the next day so sore and burning in so many places that it paralyzes them and they never want to go back. And so, this is the perspective shift. How do we see these things? And your point on faith is hard. We talked about this before as people of faith. When you're really, really struggling, we can convince ourselves, right? This is one of those unhelpful narratives that not only is the world out to get me, but God is done. And then one of the images, one of the visuals I like to use is I live in Florida. We have an abundance of sunny days here. And I can be walking down the street with the sun at my back and it casts a long shadow because that's how shadows work. Oops, sorry. They're an absence of light. But I could focus if I wanted to, if I chose to, so sharply on that shadow that I could convince myself that I was covered in darkness. And what is required of me to see the light, to turn 180 degrees and be bathed in it? And there are so many times that we're staring at what we believe are the dark places of our lives. And we think, wow, I don't know how I'm ever going to deal with this. When just a change of position, perspective, inviting in outside eyes, speaking up can give us all the light that we need and remind us that if God is the light, God was there all along. It was us that forgot where to look.
Yes, that's so good. And just to add to that as well, like where you put your focus, that's what's going to expand in your heart and your mind and just in your psyche in general. It's like if I'm focusing on the darkness, then that's what my mind is going to think about, and that's what's going to begin to manifest in my life.
Right.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
This is we're talking about, we're like deep diving into the whole mindset thing here. How much of this do you tap into when you're like coaching or consulting with businesses? I mean, obviously these are things that all people must realize, but how do you kind of approach that? Because, you said earlier, there has to be an awareness first. People have to know there's a problem before you can address the problem. Like, how do you even broach this?
So my approach is to start with relationship. So if I go into an organization and I'm going to be there for any length of time, I'm going to want to interview somewhere between, 8 and 20 people one-on-one for 45 minutes to an hour. And what I do is I try and get them to tell me their story about their time in the organization. Tell me some things you love. Tell me some things you struggle with. And then just invite them into a relationship so that there's some comfort there talking about these sometimes uncomfortable topics. And then we sort of take those ideas and we create the themes that are recurring and say, okay, these are the things that we need to attack. But the mindset piece comes up all the time. The awareness piece comes up all the time. And every once in a while, you'll hear somebody tell you all the things that are wrong. And you wonder to yourself, are there any mirrors in this person's house? Do they ever look at themselves as maybe having a role in this at all? And so really encouraging people to be aware, encouraging them to be honest, really fighting with higher ups for transparency and vulnerability, because those are the things that draw people into relationship. But from there, once you have a relationship with people, you're just inviting them into trying something. Think about this a little bit differently. If I go in and I say, hey, Amber, you've got to change the format of your show. You have to. If you're anything like me, you decide in that moment you're never changing, and certainly not for somebody else. And so the idea is here, we're going to invite people into an opportunity to think differently. that potentially has a higher ceiling than the way they're thinking now.
Mm.
They lose nothing, right? If it doesn't work, they go back to what they're doing, comfortable again, they're in a rhythm, they're in a routine. But if we get them to a place where they're thinking differently, and therefore they're being more productive, well, now they're listening to everything. Now they want to hear every nugget. They want to incorporate every idea and concept that they can possibly get their hands on. When I remember my very, very first opportunity to interview to be a college coach, I was still a senior in college, and I interviewed at Morgan State University, which is a historically Black college. And I walked on campus, and it was very much a historically Black campus. I didn't see a lot of other Caucasian people walking around. I may not have seen any. And I sat with the head coach, and we had this fantastic 2-hour discussion / interview. And at the end, he said, "Hey, I have to ask you one question. I'd be remiss if I didn't answer it." And I'm sure he's going to ask me, because it was my perspective, why does a guy who's, not African American want to work here? And that's not what he asked me, right? Because it was his perspective. He said, "Why are they going to listen to you?" And it was the first time I was really ever put on the spot in the interview, and I just blurted out, because they're going to get better. I had the confidence in myself that I could help these players get better. And I said, and once they start to get better, they're not going to care if I'm purple or plaid. They're just going to want to keep getting better. And that's the beauty of relationships that are built on trust. We invite people into our lives who helped us to elevate our own game, our own work ethic, our own whatever. Start to realize some of these hopes and dreams that we've held for a long time. And we trust them to be a partner in that process. But it all starts with relationship, because telling people how they have to change in order to accomplish what they want often falls on deaf ears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find that it helps when you can convince them that they have a purpose?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm gonna frame it a little bit differently. And I was thinking as you were lining up the last question, you use different words, right? So we talk about reframing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not so much that I say, "Hey, I think that you have purpose. We need to find your purpose." I want to make sure people know that they matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be able to point out the ways in which they're already making the organization better, and how with a little added flexibility, they might even contribute more. Because I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, well, maybe some people do. I wonder what's the least I can do at my job today. What's the least I can do? How little can I impact what happens around there? I think for the most part, people want to go in and contribute. And so tapping in that desire to contribute, painting a picture of how they might contribute more, I think it creates a bridge into that thinking and that thought process.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I truly believe that all people have purpose, and I believe that you find significance when you find your purpose, and when you find and it's not cut and dry. It's not something that you just, hey, I want to find my purpose, and I go out and find it. Like, it takes some thought. It takes some
Not like an egg hunt, right?
right.
Not that simple.
It's like a long egg hunt for like a golden egg in a huge city like New York. But
then you find a bunch of bad ones along the way too.
That's right.
By the way,
that's right. It's a lot of trial and error. But I truly believe that when people can find their purpose, that gives them something to push towards. I've seen that in my own life.
Yeah.
Is it something that you've seen also in yours?
It is. And what I would say is, so as I come from the outside to work with people, I want to help them understand that they matter. Mm-hmm. They need to discover and uncover and live into their purpose. Because ultimately, don't you think that we are, as people of faith, called to a purpose? Mm-hmm. But we ultimately are the people who say, yeah, this is it for me. It definitely has affected me. Even though it wasn't a healthy strategy, the way that I coped for all these years, feeling terrible about myself, really struggling with some significant inner turmoil and pain, was I was pouring myself into other people. Because if I could do that, it sort of gave me the opportunity to live on their turf and not have to be over here by myself where things hurt It allowed me to really have significant connection and strong relationships. And so for me, that purpose was there even before I really understood what it was.
Mm.
But for me, that purpose goes back to the very first resume I ever wrote. I had a roommate my senior year in college, still a good friend named Roy Hilliard. And Roy was bound for the world of the Fortune 500. I was an art major who wanted to coach football. Right. Put those two things together. And I was working on resumes to send out to colleges to be a graduate assistant. And I had no idea what a resume was or what it was supposed to say. So Roy and I sit down at this computer in this lab. And I laughed to even think what a computer looked like in 1992. But we're working on my resume, and he says, "Hey, your resume needs to have a statement at the top that says what you're doing, what this is all about. What are you looking for?" And I said, and I'm just forgetting the word that we use for that particular bullet, but I said, "Oh, I want to make an impact in the lives of other people." And I said, because that's what my coaches did for me. They helped me become a better person, all around. And he goes, "Well, that's not really what they want to hear." He goes, "Like we're going to write a letter to the University of Maryland, so it should say, my goal is to secure a position as a graduate assistant at the University of Maryland." And I'm like, "Well, that's stupid. They know that, or I wouldn't be sending them my resume, right? Everybody knows that's what I want." And so at the very end, and I still have a copy of this somewhere, that statement in my resume, the very first time, said, "To secure a position as a Division I graduate assistant football coach and impact the lives of other people," because to me that was so central. And that purpose has been there even before I could really put it to use in a meaningful way.
Mm. That's so powerful. And your life and your work is a manifestation of that. Like now this is what you're doing. And you're using the
Yeah,
gifts that God's given you, even to the
without a doubt.
extent of the dyslexia. Like, can you look back in your life and see places that being dyslexic actually was a good thing?
Yeah. Um, so one of the things that I loved about coaching, there are all these different things that you do to get ready for a game, but really being successful as a coach in a game, you have to be able to see, process, and adjust on the fly. When I would be in a class in 11th grade, Miss Caracella's English class, Annandale High School, Northern Virginia, we're reading The Grapes of Wrath.
Mm.
And I don't know if you ever read The Grapes of Wrath. I
Mm-mm.
have not. It was assigned to me, but I got as far as like maybe the third or the fifth chapter, and it's an allegory because they're crossing the country, and it's an allegory about this turtle that crosses the road, and it's like 20 pages long, and at face value, a turtle crosses the road, and I remember battling through that chapter and like my eyes are heavy, I can barely stay focused, I'm not getting it, I'm not understanding it. I read that chapter, I'm like, I'm done. So a couple days later, when the next couple of chapters in the book were due, we had to go in and we had to share. We were graded on class participation. And I remember very clearly, I walked in, I sat in my seat, there's about 20 other kids in this circle to talk about the book, and my teacher gave her synopsis. And I listened for about 10 minutes as other people gave their viewpoints and shared what they thought about those chapters. And then I took the conversation over. And all I did was begin to weave together the thoughts of other people into something that was meaningful and sounded like my own. And so it's given me this experience of how to be able to, be in the moment and piece things together to create a response that's helpful. And it may seem like all I was trying to do then was get away with not doing my homework. There was part of that. I was 17, for crying out loud. But in a lot of ways, I had to learn how to be coping along the way all the time in a way that didn't drain my energy. That this was just going to be part of who I was and how I thought. The hard part is I almost can never turn it off. And that's the hardest part for me now, that my brain is almost always cranking. People are telling me the most innocuous story, and my brain's like trying to break it down, understand it, put it in context. But there are definitely ways in which not being able to consume information the way that other people did helped me develop strategies to handle situations that are often uncomfortable for other people.
Mm. Yeah. I had a similar story in the same point being made here, that I remember when I first learned that I was an empath, and I thought it was a curse. I was like,
Right.
why do I? Because I attract people that want to take advantage. I attract people that I have to constantly set up boundaries, and boundaries made me
Right.
uncomfortable.
Yep.
And I was like, I remember asking God at one point in my life, like, why did you make me this way? Like, why can't
Mm-hmm.
I be more bold? Why can't I be more like, have more boundaries? Why am I this way? And why you made me an empath? Like, why do I care
Yeah.
so much about people's feelings, to the point that it would bother me? Like, when I was a kid, I remember seeing people like strangers, and I would just feel an overwhelming like compassion for them, and I didn't really know why, even as a kid, how to deal with that. And when I started this podcast, I would hear stories of trauma, and I would struggle. I would wrestle with it for days sometimes, and because I truly feel people's emotions.
Right.
And it's on the surface, it's like, oh, well, how could you ever think that was a curse? Well, because I really struggled with it.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's funny because I felt like God literally answered me and said, what I gave you is not a curse, it's a blessing.
Right.
It takes work to sharpen your tool. Like, of course, this is a tool that you have, that I've created you to have, for the purpose and the destiny that I've created you for in this world.
Sure.
However, yes, you have to learn how to manage it. You have to learn how to shape it, control it. Like, you have to learn how to set boundaries. You have to learn when to fully give all your emotions into that thing. And then you have to learn when it's not healthy, to
Right.
sit and dwell in that. And
Right.
through that process, I've learned so much about myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
look back now and I think, this is truly like what God is. He created me to be an empath, and
Right.
not the podcast. This is one facet of what I do, but in everything that I do. And when I learned that purpose, when I learned to zero in and to focus in on my strengths,
Right.
there is where I started to find fulfillment in my life, true fulfillment.
Absolutely. No, and I have some of those empath traits as well. And there were times where I was watching young people that I was coaching going through things, and you hurt for them, or they literally feel their pain,
Mm.
and it can distract you from things that are happening in your own life, and it can be challenging. So, like you said, boundaries, but also learning how to balance the emotions that come from other people. And I like to use the illustration of we have to be careful when we start to carry other people's water. If you can think of a day where we had to go to the well and get the water for the day, and I had to be able to carry my own, bring it back to where I lived. That if I start carrying everybody else's, and I forget to carry my own, then I'm also not caring for myself in the best way possible. And so that balance becomes really important. And I alluded to remembering as a very young person having this moment where I was having these emotions that felt overwhelming. When my parents asked me what was going on, I didn't tell the truth. It was one of those moments. I was sitting in my room, just playing like a kid, and started thinking about my family. I started thinking about the family members that I had not met because they were gone before I was born. Why at 4 or 5 years old does that happen? I can't even tell you. And I started to hurt because I didn't know them, because I wish that I had, and wondered, how they were part of me, and I just started crying. And my parents came up thinking that I was hurt or whatever, and it wasn't physical, but I covered for it because I was pretty sure I didn't have the words for it, and I also didn't want them to think there was something wrong. And that became this early moment where, okay, I'm going to make sure everybody thinks that I'm okay. And as an empath, there are times where you step into a story and you're not okay. And we need to be able to share that as well. Go to
Mhm.
somebody who's reliable, who's safe, and say, "Man, I got to tell you what I'm feeling right now. It feels like it's happening to me," and have them help us disconnect, not in a way that's unfeeling, but in a way that allows us to stay in balance.
Mhm. So good. That's great advice. Um, so I know we're getting kind of close to the hour here, but I do want you to have an opportunity to kind of tell my listeners if they want to learn more about you or like what,
Sure.
how to contact you, how to get in contact with you or follow along on your journey of what you're doing.
So it's interesting. So my name is a little unusual. I'm Todd with one D. My mom told me that she knew when I was born that she wanted me to be unique. Success achieved, as my name's been misspelled my entire life. And then Creneti is an unusual last name. So you have Todcre. I can't even spell my own name right now. That's great. Todcreneti. And Todd Creneti, all one word, .com is my website. And that's largely that lives around sort of speaking and the coaching that I do. But I would love for people who want to reach out and have my email, and Todd Creneti at Gmail is how you find me. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Creneti, um, but I'm not as active as I should be, probably because of my age. At 55, I'm still learning from the other side. But really, I invite people who want to be in a relationship, who want to be connected, who want to share thoughts or work together, whatever it might be. Any chance I have the opportunity to grow my circle with people who are like-minded or people who can challenge me, make me better, I invite that.
Yeah. Well, and I will be sure to put all of that information in the show notes as well so people
Thank you.
can reach out if they I know not all people look at the show notes, but
Right.
for those of you who do, and if you're curious and want to go find Todd, for sure that's a way to find him. But your work is awesome. You definitely are doing a huge thing in the world and making the impact that you said you wanted to make. I see that just radiate from you, and I'm very grateful for people like you in the world who want to make a difference. And I just want to say this too. I'm a mother of a 13-year-old boy. He is plays basketball, and I am so blessed that he has coaches that I've seen him have different coaches over, the last few years, and he's they make such an impact in his life. I have seen
Right.
coaches get through to him where me and his father can't. I've seen,
Right.
you know, I saw one of his coaches said something to him one day, and I mean, he cleaned up his act, and it had been like we had been getting on to him over it. He didn't listen to mom and dad,
Right.
but he listened to the coach because there's a huge role that coaches play, and this is in youth sports, but I think it
Right.
even bleeds into adult business type stuff what you're doing now because
There's no question. There's no question.
yeah, it's
And when we have these
huge.
good experiences with good coaches at a young age, we train how to be in those kinds of healthy relationships.
Mhm.
And coaches. One of the things that I pray for is that everybody who coaches understands the potential impact that exists. And there are a lot of coaches out there. Joe Ehrman, who's written some things I really enjoy, who runs a ministry called The Door in Baltimore, or has. He talks about coaches being either transactional or transformational. And the prayer would be that every young person has the opportunity to play for a transformational coach, help them become something greater than they were when they arrived.
Mm. So good. I mean, as a mother, I'll tell you that's what I want for my kid. And I
Oh yeah,
wish that my parents had put me in more sports as a kid. Um, so that I could have gathered some of that early, but it wasn't in the plan for me. But now, as I age, get older, and get wiser, I see the value in it. So,
well, and I want to take a moment to say thank you to you for the opportunity to be a part of this, and not only to share my story, but to be part of something that is having a conversation that is so hard for so many. And I hope that in some small way, the things that we talk about, the things you discuss with your other guests, I hope they're a light to the people out there who are wrestling, and that it reminds them that they're not one of one. They're one of a history of people who have wrestled, and many of whom have overcome.
Mhm. And you just dropped the mic. That was very good. And I totally agree. Like I pray that my listeners will heed those words, especially the people that are struggling with mindset. And we all go through life is a roller coaster. It goes up and down,
Oh,
and we go through times where we can be here and we can help other people up, and then there's times where we're down and we need other people to help us up. That's the beauty of life, though, and the beauty of the journey of
agreed.
life. Yeah.
Right.
Todd, thank you so much for just all your expertise, for coming, just spending this time with us today and sharing all of these things. Very, very impactful.
It's my pleasure, and I really, really enjoyed being a part of this today. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.